Good morning. Can you hear me okay? Good. Maybe we should introduce ourselves first. I'll go and then you can go. So we've corresponded, but we haven't really rehearsed this, so we'll see how it goes. Craig Watkins, wear a few different hats here at UT, but I think primarily for the purposes of this presentation, I'm one of the co-principal investigators for the racial justice core research group. We have 3 different projects underneath that broader core research project, and I'll be talking about one of those today, which is focusing on this, our efforts to understand more ethical and effective ways to apply AI to health challenges and health equity in particular.
Great, thank you. Craig, so I'm the Assistant Dean for Health Innovation at the Med School, and Craig's project, this project came through one of the innovation programs that we have at the Med School, and I'll speak to you how we provided some value to the project and where they are right now.
Okay, great.
Understand. Great.
Okay. So most of you probably know that the sort of I think central questions that have always been kind of at the heart of the Good Systems Grand Challenge are these 3 questions here. And in some ways, I think the project that we'll discuss today is a reflection of how those questions can come together and inform dynamic expressions of what we hope to achieve with the Good Systems Grand Challenge. So the first question, what is a good system, is in many respects variously a political and sort of philosophical question. What does it mean to create good AI? Good for who? What defines good, et cetera? I like to joke that it's only us academics, right, who could make a word like good utterly sort of difficult to really define in any clear way, but perhaps that's one of the contributions that we make to society, I hope. How do you evaluate good systems? This obviously has to do with just the various sort of research projects that have emerged out of good systems and different techniques, different approaches to trying to assess what AI means to society, what its broad sort of downstream implications are. And then the third one, which is what we'll talk about today a little bit, is how do you build good systems? So we talk a lot within good systems about ethical AI, about responsible AI and what that means. This is obviously becoming a conversation that's widespread, not only here at Good Systems, but societally. And so we've been thinking about this as well, right? What are the components or what are the elements to building ethical, good artificial intelligence? And we'll share with you a little bit of how we've been thinking about that. I would say that over the years, the research that we've been doing, both with Good Systems and even before Good Systems, has in some ways informed how we ended up kind of with Ruben and his team over at the Med School. So we've been focusing within our project on the behavioral health crises here in the United States. Probably not a lot to say here. I suspect that we all understand that this is something that's emerged as a critical issue. If it's depression, if it's general anxiety disorder, the U.S. Surgeon General, for example, has declared loneliness an epidemic. And so there are a variety of ways in which this gets expressed, increasing rates of suicide, and so a lot of reasons and a lot of factors for that. But we were sort of particularly interested in how just the implications of technology, right, in the behavioral health crises. And a lot of people, for example, sort of attribute part of what's going on with the behavioral health crisis to the rise in technology, the rise of social media, smartphones, and a lot of the sort of practices and behaviors that are associated with that. Here's one of the interesting challenges that we wanted to address in our work. So there's this huge gap between the number of people who are in need of behavioral health care, mental health care, and those service providers who are able to deliver or to meet that demand. And many would argue, right, that this has in some ways exacerbated the crises as more people are looking for, seeking help, seeking support. There simply, right, aren't enough trained professionals to respond to this crisis. And there's concerns about will there ever be. And so the need to sort of develop alternative solutions or additional solutions to help address this sort of gap in terms of access to care. And you can see here, right, that the state of Texas, not surprisingly, right, given its sort of expanding population over the last 20, 25 years or so, is certainly a representation of that critical gap that we see here. So this explains in part, right, why digital solutions have become increasingly important. They are regarded in some ways, right, as an opportunity to sort of address the sort of workforce deficiencies, to address, right, the ability to deliver more precise, more predictive, more real-time care. And so there's certainly a lot of promise associated with these technologies, if it's wearables, if it's smartphones, for example, but there are obviously, right, a lot of perils associated with these technologies as well. There are issues around privacy, issues around access and literacy, and so there are a lot of interesting challenges that are coming along with this sort of proliferation, sort of acceleration of digital health as a solution as a response to the behavioral health crises in this country. And just wanted to show you a couple of examples of how this gets articulated in terms of research. So some of you may be familiar, right, with just the rise of conversational agents and how these are used in some ways to serve either as an intervention, as an alternative, as a means, right, of addressing these kinds of crises. And so a chatbot conversational agent like this, right, might do a number of different things, provide access to resources, provide access to psychoeducation that is helping people sort of develop a better understanding and even vocabulary to be able to articulate what's happening with them. And certainly, right, while there are opportunities associated with these kinds of breakthroughs, with these kinds of interventions, there are obviously, right, a lot of challenges too. And we experienced this firsthand. So I was part of a team that was funded by Good Systems where we worked with computer scientists, worked with maternal health specialists, social scientists, and designers to sort of test out a generative AI chatbot. I have to say that we started this work a few years before the explosion of ChatGPT. We started this around 2018 or 2019, and these were in the days of ChatGPT 2. And so you can imagine, right, just how quickly this is evolving and how crude of an apparatus this was at the time, even though, right, it was a pretty amazing experience. But what we were interested in doing here was trying to, and you can see, you can look this project up in a paper that we published, we were simply trying to design a chat interface that could in some ways perform similar to how a human might respond. And so we had access to maternal health organization, access to their data, access to conversations that they had documented or recorded, either voice recording or text-based recording, and we just tried to understand, right, what is an ethical response? What is a empathetic response, right, in terms of how humans are trained to respond to someone dealing, in this case, with a postpartum situation. And the idea, right, is could we train a model to, in some ways, approximate how a human might respond in a similar situation. And in the paper, we talk about, right, some of the trade-offs in terms of a rules-based sort of chat interface versus the more generative AI interface. In addition, we have a team that's been doing some computational work and sort of thinking about what are oftentimes referred to as the social determinants of health. And maybe some of you have heard this term, but it's a term that oftentimes essentially refers to, it's this notion by the World Health Organization, right, that where we're born, where we live, where we play, work, worship, et cetera, that environment and the resources within that environment or lack of resources within that environment have a significant impact on health outcomes and health disparities in particular. And so there are any number of social determinants of health that have been identified: education, access to health care, access to transportation, access to fresh fruits and vegetables, built environment. So there are all of these different sort of indicators, right, that in some ways sort of speak to how these non-medical drivers of health outcomes are so important. And what we've wanted to try to do is, while there is growing sort of consensus within the medical, health, public health space, Ruben, as you know, social science researchers, for example, growing consensus that social determinants of health matter. What we wanted to try to do, looking at some large data sets from the National Institutes of Health, is to try to understand precisely how social determinants of health matter, which social determinants of health matter. And so we know not all social determinants of health are necessarily equal, nor do they distribute in an equal way. And so in this research, we were trying to look at social determinants of health, along with what we characterize as social positions, race, ethnicity, gender, age, education, for example, to see how these interactions, right, might be predictive of a behavioral health diagnosis like depression intervention. And so this is the paper that we currently have under review, but it sort of speaks to the ways in which we're trying to bring computational techniques to sort of understand how mental health outcomes express themselves and how we understand that with a little bit more nuance, with a little bit more clarity that then might support, right, other kinds of interventions. And so what we started working on about 4 years ago or so, and we sort of integrated this project with some of the work that we're doing with Good Systems, is we sort of collected a group of designers. And we went out and just started talking to healthcare professionals in the behavioral healthcare space, clinicians. In fact, we started here on campus with clinicians, reached out into the wider community here in Austin and Central Texas, talking to everyone along the spectrum, clinicians to non-clinicians, those who prescribe versus those who are more peer-oriented, advocate for and champion for someone that they're supporting, but don't necessarily diagnose or in the position to prescribe medicine, for example. But it's this idea, right, that there's a range, there's a sort of broad and sort of behavioral healthcare workforce out there, and how could you design, right, an AI tool or behavioral health platform that might allow them to sort of address, right, this increasing pressure that they face in terms of the number of people that they're having to treat, in fact, having to turn away people because there's so many people who are looking for support. But some of the things that we're trying to do with the platform that we've been designing and sort of testing, and now we have a digital prototype, we're looking to get some funding to allow us to do some pilot testing and are very close to this opportunity. But what we wanted to do, right, was to do a few things to see if we could, again, augment the delivery of behavioral health care, but also capture really interesting kinds of data. So in addition to clinical data, right, what are those sort of social, behavioral, and environmental signals that might help us better understand what might be predictive of a behavioral health outcome or even an emergency, and how, if you could understand those signals beforehand, how it might allow you to intervene in a way that might reduce the prospect, right, for an emergency situation occurring. And so capturing data real time, so thinking about wearable devices, our prototype is primarily around the smartphone, and using a smartphone as a way to capture real-time in-the-moment data that then may be used as a source of information that could be fed back to a care provider and sort of generating relevant analytics, feedbacks, and insights that could just improve the quality of care that's being delivered. What we oftentimes hear in the interviews that we do with care providers, right, is that if they had some sense of what was happening beyond the clinic, which is basically all the time, then it might give them a better sense of how to intervene, how to develop, right, a path to wellness. And so all of this work and more was something that we sort of put together in a proposal that we submitted to Ruben's team, Texas Health Catalyst at Dell. And I'm going to have Ruben tell you a little bit about the Texas Health Catalyst program, and then we'll talk a little bit about how we partnered and are working together on this project.
Great, thank you. I think I'm going to stand.
Okay.
Thank you, Craig. So, is it on? Okay, great. Good. So, yes, thank you, Craig. And I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes talking about the program that Craig's project went through. As you know, the project addresses a huge unmet need, specifically around vulnerable communities. And you know, we talk about here at UT how what starts here changes the world. Now, to do that, it needs to get out in the world in the first place. And for that to happen, someone in the world needs to care about what we're working on in the first place, and that's what the program helps to do. So when Craig applied with this project through our program, what we do, we have a call for proposal. We just announced a call for proposal that we just launched. This deadline is end of April. We collect the calls, and then we bring in primarily industry and clinical experts in to review these proposals. And what we're looking for is how can we help these projects maximize their clinical relevance, and also how can we maximize their commercial viability? Because I'm sure most of you know, especially in healthcare, even if you have something that works, even if you have data that shows that health outcomes improves, it doesn't mean that it easily fits within our current clinical workflow. It doesn't mean that it's commercially viable. It's unfortunate, but that's how our system works. And so what this program does is to help these projects identify their true value proposition, how they might fit within clinical workflows, and how they might wrap a business model around what they're doing. So typically projects come in, and just like this one, there are huge problems that they can solve. But what we were able to do with this project was to identify industry clinical experts in strategy, in marketing, in design, to help shape the project so that we identify where do we start, so the so-called beachhead market. So often there is a subpopulation that we can sort of start with that are desperate for a solution like this. There are payment models that will pay for a solution like this. And once we enter that market and show that we can win in that market, we can scale more broadly. And that's what we help these projects do. Often new intellectual property comes out of that process. Many times, many of these experts we bring in become strategic partners, whether they're large tech companies or large pharma medical device companies. And we build these teams to support these projects and move on. And then it leads to some seed funding. We have seed funding that we provide to try and mitigate the biggest clinical and commercial risks. And that's what we did in Craig's project, where we funded a couple of people from our health equity team to help the project identify the beachhead market, but also within this market, what does the technology need to look like to the ultimate user so that it'll be adopted and adopted for the long term. As you know, this is a very large but fragmented market. There are lots of mental health apps out there, but this has a true value, and that's differentiated, and that's what we did with Craig's project to sort of help identify what that value point was. And as I mentioned, we have 2 cycles a year. We just launched one. I don't know if that QR code works. If not, and if you're interested, just Google Texas Health Catalyst and you'll find it. So thank you.
So we'll wrap here. Ruben's talked a little bit about what we've done. I can add a little bit more to that in terms of what the work with Ruben and his team has been like. So I would say among the many different contributions that they've made to our effort is sort of matching us with advisors and consultants, and sort of helping us to think about a wide range of things that we ordinarily as academics typically don't think about. But the work, just to give you an example, the work with the Health Equity Office, the Office of Health Equity at Dell, has really been instrumental in terms of helping us think about what are the sort of equity implications associated with the technology that we're trying to design. So when we talk about social determinants of health, that becomes one of a number of different mechanisms to really understand, right, how health outcomes distribute sort of unevenly across important sort of, demographic characteristics, race, ethnicity, gender, age, education, sexual orientation, et cetera. And so what, for instance, the work with the med school has enabled us to do is to really begin to understand, right, everything from the design of our product in terms of the user interface, the language that we use, for example, and how that may or may not contribute to certain kinds of biases, contribute to more people feeling as though this is a platform that may be accessible to them. So one of the things that we heard over and over from the advisors that the med school connected us to was sort of thinking about, right, how to differentiate our product, what we were trying to do from others. And one opportunity they thought that was really sort of clearly expressed in our work, right, was this opportunity to sort of tap into a market, right, that really has been underserved in this space. And so if you think about, right, the proliferation of digital applications, if you think about the proliferation of digital health services, really sort of asking the question, right, who have these services been designed for, and what are the implications of those kinds of design choices that are oftentimes implicit, right, in terms of how bias gets articulated. And so what we've tried to do, right, is to make sure that our project is rooted in, right, some ethical concerns around equity, around access, and around sort of expanding, who participates in these kinds of digital health opportunities. And then the commercialization, I think you've talked a little bit about that, but obviously sort of thinking about what are the market opportunities here, and how do we begin to sort of carve out a space that we think might be unique and novel to what it is that we're trying to offer. And I would say just broadly speaking, right, sort of thinking about good systems, thinking about our core research project, which is really committed to understanding the ways in which we can design these systems in ways that address and mitigate racial and ethnic disparities, for example, that's been kind of a core feature, a core principle, a kind of call to action in terms of the work that we've been doing. And so just really trying to figure out how all of our design work, how everything from the software, now getting into thinking about like the data architecture and how do we, capture data and build an architecture that could allow us to sort of develop high levels of insight and analytics that might allow us to understand in more sort of empirically nuanced ways what's happening on the ground in terms of how health outcomes get expressed and the ways in which disparities are very much a core feature of how those outcomes get expressed. I don't know if you had any final thoughts?
Oh, just to add to the commercialization piece, so many of these good system projects, they may not think of themselves as commercial products, but regardless, even if you're going to scale this out as a nonprofit, there needs to be someone who's willing to pay for it for you to be sustainable. And so we help these teams think about how you do that. And the last thing I would say is, it's great that the technology works, even if it identifies a target market. What really makes this project and made this project successful in our program is the diversity of the team and how readily they were willing to take in information. We sometimes get projects where the teams are great, but they're not willing to take in that feedback and maybe pivot towards something that's more commercially tangible or clinically relevant. But with this team, the reason why they're so successful is because they're willing to listen and they're coachable.
So I think we can, thank you. So I think we have time maybe for a question or two. Okay. I think there's one here. Hearing it.
Hi. So I hear you talking about how you are going to look at the outcomes and who's being serviced, but as someone who's dealt with depression, I'm not sure that I would want to talk to a chatbot and have you surveyed users to see if they want more digital connection or if they really want a human connection. And is it, 50-50? Some people don't mind being serviced by a chatbot. Or have you explored other ways that AI can address this gap? We definitely see there is a need. And how can we address that need while still keeping it as a human-centric service?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for that question and for sharing. So my failure on my part. So what I presented to you, we're not developing a chatbot. What we're doing is really just trying to figure out ways to use a smartphone and maybe sensors on a smartphone to capture a range of things, maybe levels of activity, social interactions. We have sort of developed a platform that might allow us to prompt for and to try to understand specific moments and what's happening in a particular moment and how that may help us understand more broadly what's happening in an environment. So I showed you the chatbot project that we sort of experimented with a couple of years or so ago, just to give you an example of different ways in which digital health solutions, AI solutions are being developed to try to address this problem. But we're not building a chat interface or a chat-based product. But more broadly, I think what your question gets at is a critical one, and that is this relationship, right, between the sort of human aspect of technology and how we sort of leverage human expertise in this broader experience. It oftentimes is sort of expressed as, I think, a sort of a tension between automation and augmentation. And so I think what we're trying to design is a system that doesn't augment, that is to say that replaces the human in the sort of care experience, but rather sort of augments their capacity to understand with a little bit more deeper precision what's going on with the client or what's going on with the patient. So it's our vision and our hope, right, that this doesn't replace a human care provider, but rather it enhances, rather it deepens their capacity to deliver services that are more data informed, data insightful, which we think could therefore become much more impactful. And so my apologies for not being clear about that, but no, I would agree with you, that the idea of a chat interface as an exclusive mode of support certainly has some potential problematic features.
Yeah, if I could just quickly add to that. So, this question comes up all the time, and we have several projects going through the med school where, for example, you saw how loneliness affects this population quite a bit, and so we have projects where we are trying to intervene in a non-clinical way to impact health and clinical outcomes. So we have a project called Factor Health, where we actually have weekly calls with an older population, and we call them once a week. And we have volunteer callers and we just talk to them about how they're doing. We don't ask them about their diabetes or whatever health conditions they're going on. We have half-an-hour calls with them every week. They look forward to the calls, and we show that loneliness scores actually come down. They're doing much better, and their health actually improves. And we could not replicate that with digital technology. So I think you make a very good point. This comes up all the time.
Thanks, Craig Wheeler. I'm an emeritus astronomer, a bit interested in this whole thing. I understand why commercialization is part of your goal to get out there and enhance things, but I hope this doesn't sound like a rude question, but just in terms of where it's going, is there profit to be made for your project right now, or is that just a question of principle down the road? And if there's profit, how do you share it?
If I understand the question, how is there a product, and if so, any profits generated, how are those profits shared?
Commercialization is to profit somewhat between Dell School and what you're doing.
Yeah, well, we've sort of worked with the university to spin this out into a company, basically, and so the company would largely sort of develop the model and the framework to execute on that end.
Yeah, and I think we're still sort of thinking through what the commercial model might be. So, for example, if the entity that's spun out is a nonprofit, then you still need to make money to kind of sustain the nonprofit, right? So then there's no kind of extra profit. But if it's a for-profit company that Craig's wants to develop, there are. The profit still comes back to the company. The university benefits from this as well, because there's intellectual property to the university, so that there will be revenue coming to the university as well. But yes, the idea is we want to commercialize this in some way, so there is a way to sustain it and grow it, right?
That hasn't happened yet.
No.
Thank you.
Yeah.